And now, please welcome Chairman and CEO of Airbus Americas Incorporated, Jeff Knittel, in discussion with Skift Editor-in-Chief, Sarah Kopit.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Well, thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about modernizing aviation's future.
Yes.
So let's talk about the children.
Okay.
So when I think about the future, I think about the kids. Do you think that the aviation industry as a whole has a problem attracting young people to come in?
I think young people want to be in this industry when they learn how great it is. I think we need to think about it differently as an industry. I'll give you some thoughts relative to what we're doing and how I think it's making a difference in not only how we recruit, but how young people think about this industry. So one, when we're hiring, we're not just starting going to colleges and doing those things. We have apprenticeships now, which we're focused on, internships, co-ops, which a lot of people do. But more importantly, we're going into middle school. We have a program called We Build It Better. We've partnered with Snap-on Tools, with Amazon. And basically, I think if you've ever been into an auto parts store or into a hangar, you see these big red Snap-on tool kits. Mm-hmm. What we've done is we give one of these that's very specialized and teaches how to measure, just pure measurements, what torque is, what electricity is. And this is a many-month course. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's almost a year. And these kids get to learn real skills and hopefully fall in love with aviation. But if not aviation, they have skills to go on something else in their life. And it started out in Alabama in one district. I think we're in 15 states at this point. So it's about energizing the youth because the industry is pretty cool. I mean, if you think about it, if you want to be an engineer, do you want to build airplanes or do you want to make paper towel racks, right? I mean, I think we can win.
Yeah. So let's talk about global demand for a minute. Boeing has said that global demand for them is robust. How does Airbus see it?
More robust. No, I'm only kidding. The market has been really strong.
Yeah.
As you know, we have a huge backlog, 8,000 airplanes at this point, and it goes well out into the future. I think that's a function of a few things. Demand is exceptionally strong, both on single aisle and on wide body. There's growth in the industry that drives that. And I think we're pretty proud of our product suite, going from single aisle up to twin aisle. I think it's a combination of those things, but this is a growing industry, and there's two sides. It's a growing industry, and there's a replacement cycle, right? So the replacement cycle of taking older airplanes out, putting in new, more efficient airplanes, and they're efficient in a lot of different ways, including fuel efficiency, is a really important part of the process.
On the supply side, there seems to be, however, a shortage of so many things. And the airlines seem to be frustrated that they're not getting their airplanes sometimes.
Sure.
What has your experience been at Airbus? And when do you think it might, and if you agree, when do you think that will improve?
Well, one, we've been pretty public that airplanes have slipped a little bit. They have improved, the deliveries have improved as the supply chain has improved. But when you look at the supply chain, and I think we are much better, I think the industry is much better at managing the supply chain through COVID. And what I mean by that is we changed the intensity of what we do. We're now getting into the tier 4, not just the tier 1, but the tier 4 suppliers to fully understand what's going on. And we're tying what they tell us to our projections, and then bring best practices across the board, and I think that's really helped. Now, are there some raw material shortages in certain places? Yes. Are there labor issues in the lower tier? There are some, but we're helping them, and it's not just us, but the larger players in the industry are helping those suppliers to meet the goals. And as we do that, it gets better. One of the things we're also trying to be is very transparent in where we're going. We've talked about our goals for delivering, in this case, 720 airplanes this year, taking our single aisles up to 75 airplanes a month by 2026. So we think by telling the supply chain where we're going, it allows them to adjust and be prepared. And it's not a situation where they're shocked that Airbus is asking them to do X.
Is Airbus delivering airplanes on time?
We are delivering some airplanes on time. I can't tell you it's all airplanes on time. And even in the best of times, there can be issues. The supply chain in aviation is really complex. And when you start thinking about between 1.5, 1.7 million parts to 2 million parts that come together to build an airplane that's going to fly at 35,000 feet at 500 miles an hour, you want to make sure your supply chain is robust. So people don't realize this, but there's always this view, we'll just bring on another supplier. To add a supplier usually takes us 2 to 3 years just to qualify them. They need to be able to do things, one, properly, but also in the safest way possible.
So we've talked a lot today about sustainability. We had Sheila and Helen from Southwest and Boeing on. I had a conversation with them just a few minutes ago. Do you think the industry will ever actually reach carbon zero?
Yeah. I think it's going to be hard. I think it's aspirational. I agree with that. But this is an industry that does hard things. People ask, what is the strategy of Airbus? Because we are known as, in some ways, as the hydrogen company. We look at hydrogen, we think that is the answer. But to be clear, it's not the only answer. SAF is a major part of this. We have to be realistic. We're investing in SAF today, and we will continue to invest in SAF because there is no way that you can turn over the fleet fast enough to convert it to hydrogen. We've said that we want to have a hydrogen airplane in service around 2035. Around that's not that long. So we'll need to make some decisions today. Now there's lots of things that are tied to that. Infrastructure is one. But we're working on all of these things, not just as Airbus, but as an ecosystem. Once buses are driven by hydrogen, and some are already today, this whole infrastructure comes together and we think makes a lot more sense. But to be clear, SAF is part and will be a major part of the solution for the near term.
So Airbus and Boeing essentially have a duopoly right now. Do you think China will ever produce a real competitor?
Well, they're producing an airplane today, the 919. I would not underestimate the Chinese. I use a story. I've had the ability, I've been lucky enough to travel around the world for many years. I was in China in 1989. So I don't know if you've been to Beijing.
Nope.
When you go to Beijing, it's multiples of Manhattan. It's just huge, and there's cars everywhere and skyscrapers. When I was there many years ago, I would be bored, and I would grab a beer, sit on my balcony. There were just 2 high-rise buildings, and I would watch bicycle traffic jams. There would be thousands and thousands of bicycles. Now, over that period of time, all those bicycles are now cars. And all that land are now high-rises. So for them to be able, if the question is, will they be able to change fast enough to build an airplane? I think the answer is yes. Will they be able to do it quickly? This is a difficult industry. It's taken Airbus a long time. Remember, Airbus was started 50 some years ago. And I think we're in a good position today, but it's taken us time to get there. It's not just building the airplanes and building them safely, which absolutely the Chinese will do, but it's also the support system. We have tens of thousands of employees who do nothing but make sure that airplanes are safe and ready to fly and not sitting on the ground and servicing the airlines.
What do you think the obstacles would be for the Chinese?
It's a really good question. I think a few things. Culture always matters. So it's a question of how will they adapt, and then what is the next step? My guess is it will be a several-prong approach. One, they will sell to Chinese airlines, right? That's pretty obvious. Next, I think they will sell to companies that have counter trade with China. And by the time they get through this process, which could be 15, 20 years, they'll then be in a position to be more competitive on a global basis. So I think it's going to be a process, but the Chinese have been known for their patience for a long time.
Yeah. So we have one question up here on the screen. I just wanted to remind everyone in the audience to send your questions on up for Jeff. Again, we're talking about modernizing aviation's future. So on that note, I saw a couple of drones on my way in, you know, not that that is, you know, hardcore aviation, but it still always surprises me a little bit when, you know, when I see them kind of buzzing around. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your helicopters and what's going on there?
So we're really proud of our helicopter business, which, by the way, is just down the road in Grand Prairie. We have about a 60% market share here in the U.S. on the commercial helicopter business. How many of you have seen the Coast Guard, the orange helicopters flying around? If you have, that's most likely an Airbus helicopter. One of the things we're proud about is Jerry Jones and the Airbus heliport. Dallas Cowboys, they fly in an Airbus helicopter. There's lots of people, EMS. So that business has been a great business for us, and we think it's going to continue to grow. Now, on the lower end segment, will there be some potentially eVTOL type things? Yeah, probably, but the helicopter business has been great.
Let's turn to business travel. It's about 85% of pre-pandemic. Do you think going forward into the future, we will see a full recovery back from before?
You heard Andrew and Robert and Bob talk about that. And they have much more expertise in predicting those types of things. I do think there was some change in behavior relative to the business segment. Look, I think if I go back 3 years, I don't think I ever Zoomed. I'm not sure I knew what Zoom was 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know how many people here can say that they were using Zoom in any large way 3 or 4 years ago. I think today, almost everybody in some form or fashion uses Zoom. And I think it will eliminate some of the maybe I don't want to say, let's say less than essential travel. So somebody can Zoom and they can continue a discussion. I still believe, and I've talked to many people about this, it's really hard to build a relationship on Zoom or any of the video type devices. You really need to do that in person.
Yeah.
We met on Zoom.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
I don't know what you thought of me, but you might. But it's sitting next to you. You know, you get a feel for somebody, and I think that's really essential. So, is it going to be on the fringe? I think the answer is possibly, but I also think there's a natural competitiveness in the business side.
Yeah.
So if we're both competing for a transaction, and I hear that Sarah was there, and I was Zooming, if I'm competitive, I'm getting on the airplane.
I was going to say, I get that. I got that contract.
Yeah, there you go. And that's just the way I think people think if they want to win.
Yeah.
And business, in a lot of ways, is about winning.
Yeah. So let's take one from the audience here. What lessons did you learn from the A380, and what adjustments will you make from designing aircrafts in the future?
Well, I think most of you are familiar with the A380, which was our largest airplane. I think the largest commercial airplane ever. It was built to compete in a segment, the very large aircraft segment, that at the time was felt to be a critical piece of the puzzle and essential if airports didn't have the real estate or gates to be able to take on all the growth. So that was the premise. And the airplane itself, although it was late, which was not helpful, was an airplane that worked really well. As a matter of fact, if you were to speak to Tim Clark at Emirates, he loves the airplane and used it, around the globe very, very efficiently. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we couldn't create enough customers to do what Tim was doing. Now, interestingly, all of a sudden that airplane is back in vogue. A lot of people, Carsten Spohr at Lufthansa is an example, he's taken 8 380s out of storage. And you're seeing many of the airlines do that because it is a great capacity machine and it does great things. That being said, it is a 4-engine airplane. We pioneer sustainable aviation. And if that's what you're doing, 4-engine airplanes don't fit that very well. So there were some learnings. It turned out to be a great airplane. We applied those learnings on airplanes like the A350 in terms of how to build airplanes and the like. And you learn let's say you learn from things sometimes that are less than optimal.
Let's talk about supersonic airplanes for a minute. We were talking in the green room that you told me that you'd ridden on the Concorde.
I did. I was lucky enough to ride on the Concorde, but and I think Andrew was asked a similar question. What came to my mind is, yes, I flew the Concorde, but because British Airways, if you bought a business class ticket, would upgrade you to the Concorde because they couldn't fill the airplane.
Ah.
So when I flew to Europe, I would fly on the Concorde. And Air France started doing a similar thing. So it does raise a question about economics. I am not an expert on the Concorde. I don't think it's going to be a huge market. I do think there will be people that want to utilize the airplane for certain missions. That being said, our focus is on sustainability. And if you're focused on sustainability, having an airplane with less seats, flying faster, which is a big advantage, we're going to go towards more of an approach of density.
Speaking of that, is Airbus working on an airplane that might be supersonic in nature?
We're working on a lot of things, but the key for us today is hydrogen. We're focused on hydrogen. We're putting a lot of effort and money, not only in hydrogen, but sustainability. And I think that's really going to be key for us in the future. And I think it's key for the industry.
Yeah. So we're going to take another one from the audience here. Jason asks, how long before we see truly autonomous airline travel, and what steps is Airbus taking to lean into the development of autonomous civilian aircraft?
So some of you may have heard that we flew our A350, which is our latest wide-body airplane, pushed back from the gate. It taxied, got into position, took off, flew around, landed, went back to the gate. The most difficult piece of this entire project was making sure the pilot wouldn't touch the control. And so we were able to accomplish that. So in terms of technology, it's doable. Now, do we think we're going to displace pilots in the entire? I don't think so. Part of it has to do with safety itself, and autonomy adds to safety. That's the way we're looking at this. You have a pilot, you have more systems, and that's a good thing. And that's how really Airbus was born. We're the company that brought fly-by-wire to commercial aviation. That it was a safety enhancement. Those types of things, and having autonomous capabilities are a safety enhancement. So we'll continue to look at those types of things, but you also have the other side of what the public will want too. So I do think the pilots are here for some time.
Well, we don't even think about it anymore as being unusual that there's autopilot for when it's coasting up in the.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's flight directors that do a lot of different things, but there are 2 pilots that are supervising. and there to ensure that everything goes well.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Get your questions in for Jeff into the monitor here, and we'll ask them. But I do have kind of a personal question. How do you like working for a European company? Any cultural differences?
Well, there are cultural yeah, there's lots of cultural differences. They drink much better wine. No, I like it a lot. And the reason I like it is, as I mentioned, I've been traveling my entire career.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy learning about other cultures. And Airbus was built around 4 countries, right? Think about it for a second. If you were in 1943, what do you think the chances of Germany, France, Spain, and the UK working together on a project were?
Yeah, not much.
Not much.
Yeah.
So you really had to learn how to work together, understand the cultural norms, and I personally think that is not only cool, but really helps Airbus as we're a global company. Let's face it, that's what we do. We're in essentially every country in the world, and understanding cultures, understand how they affect what you do, and understand how they affect individual people is really important. So I enjoy it. It's a great company to work for.
So you say you're a global company. Let's talk just briefly about globalization. Some people say it's dying, and that economies are becoming more regional, more domestic. Do you agree, and are you worried about the future of long-haul travel?
I am not personally.
Yeah.
You and I talked about some
Yeah.
books that are out there about quote-unquote deglobalization. The issue that people focus on when they're looking at deglobalization is demographics. And certain countries that actually have a shrinking populace over time, where more people will be retired than will be young.
Yeah.
And that can be problematic in terms of economic growth. I'm a believer that things tend to sort themselves, and efficiencies are really important. And I think you get efficiencies through globalization. If you look back over time, globalization allowed us to take technologies in one place and move them to somewhere else, and jumpstart those quote-unquote countries and/or civilizations. And it goes back 1,000 years. So I may be wrong, but I'm a believer in certainly next 50 years that globalization is here to stay.
All right, so we've got time for one more question from the audience. As the aviation industry undergoes rapid digitalization, what measures is Airbus taking to enhance cybersecurity and data privacy?
Well, we're spending a huge amount of time and money on that.
Yeah.
I don't think you can be a company of what we do without being involved in not only digitization, which can have so much value to a company like ours. Think about if you can apply that through the supply chain, right? Have a better understanding what's happening, and tie that actually to your factory, right? And all of a sudden you're finding out that part A is not working really well, and through a digital construct, you can have your factory make changes and the supply chain make changes. That's a pretty cool thing. Now, is that tomorrow? No, but it's there. Now, in terms of cyber, I can't even tell you how much money we spend on cybersecurity and the like. You know, when you go in our SOC, which is, you know, where you see the quote-unquote incursions, it looks like it's raining. I forget how many a minute we have. And the vast majority, we stop, right?
Yeah.
And I think our teams have done a great job. But I would say that I guess the term, I don't know what the proper term for cyber attackers is, they're pretty innovative. So we have to continue to invest, not only at Airbus, but in the supply chain.
Yeah.
You know, the supply chain gets tied to the OEM. And if they get inside the supply chain, it affects us. So I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle as we go forward.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.